David, what do you mean when you emphasize the importance of leaders recognizing the power of the spotlight?
So, when I emphasize this term, you have a spotlight on you, I often find the first response is probably the most obvious response. Oh, yeah, I'm more visible. But what I try to do is unpack that notion of visibility further. And what I mean when I say you have a spotlight on you, I frame it in terms of for leaders, they have to know that they're watched more than they realize. And I don't mean that people are necessarily creeping them and shadowing them along the way. It's just that here's the way I frame it. If someone walks out of a conference room and they're in a leadership capacity and they're so frustrated, angry about the way that meeting went, that they wear it on their face and the way they walk, and they just demonstrate it visibly that they're upset. Well, a person who's in a position of influence who acts that way, others in the hallway may look at that senior leader, we'll say in this case, and think to themselves, oh my goodness, my senior leader is clearly upset about something that may be an indication that something's not going well in the company. And thus, what does that mean for me? So that's sort of a human reaction, right? If they see someone in a position of authority who's especially upset in some fashion, it's surprising how often people turn that ultimately into what does this mean for me? So, my responsibility in part when I'm working with people leaders is to emphasize their responsibility of how they present themselves to others. And sometimes they may have to muster up the strength to be a bit of an actor at times because there's reason to be frustrated in how things go in the workplace. They don't always go well. But leaders need to be aware that people gauge how well the company is doing based in part on how leaders conduct themselves in informal ways. Thus, that's the broader meaning of a spotlight. In fact, I'll give a quick example of this, a rather dramatic one. Years ago, early in my work, I was with a semiconductor company, and unfortunately, to this day, with semiconductor companies, they often go through roller coaster stages of business. They'll ramp quickly, and then we'll use this term, and then they're in a de-ramp stage in which the world demand for semiconductors declines significantly. And as a result, all those people they hired, some of them are going to be vulnerable and ultimately their positions may go away. So a reduction in force, layoff will occur, a mass firing event, however you want to refer to that. But it means that people are losing their jobs. It's a very dark and difficult day when a company determines this day we will have to tell a number of people that their jobs are going away. And for the average person, that is devastating. And yet, for some leaders, they may try to muster up this courage within themselves, kind of guard themselves against the emotions associated with having to do this. And they tell themselves, and we hear this all the time, it's a business decision. And in part, it is a business decision, but it's a business decision that's impacting people. So the importance of this spotlight notion is through the example that I'm laying out here. And years ago, we conducted a large scale layoff in which hundreds of employees were impacted. And managers were responsible for meeting with each individual who lost their job so that the manager could tell that individual, unfortunately, your job is going away. And they leave that person to clean up their office and tick the box and head out to the parking lot. Very difficult stuff. It's such an ugly thing that is a part of the lifespan of many businesses. In this one example that I saw play out at a company I worked for as an HR leader, and I train up these managers to stick to the script, deliver the message, provide some sense of concern and care, but ultimately go through this process. There's no value in small talk. And so by the end of it, these people leaders who had completed this task of telling So many people that they had lost their job gathered in a conference room. All the people leaders did after their work had been done. And this conference room was in the corner of a space in which a lot of the remaining employees were still working. So these leaders could finally catch the breath and have a bit of solace with each other because it's an emotionally charged day of delivering these messages. So it wasn't unusual for someone to crack a joke, maybe some bit of dark humor, something just so they can provide some relief. And someone said something funny and they all cracked up and laughed. Well, the dilemma is that right outside the door were all of these remaining employees whose friends had been told that their jobs had gone away. And these people leaders didn't know that the spotlight was still squarely on them, and their perceived callousness in laughing in light of these people losing their jobs was ultimately the message that the remaining employees got out of this. And it took months, possibly even years, for the culture of this organization to recover from that event. Unbeknownst to these people leaders, the spotlight was still on them. So that's a rather dramatic example, but it's very real. And so that's why I put such an emphasis on the spotlight in my practice of coaching. I want leaders to know that they are responsible for representing the best elements of the company at all times. So that's the spotlight.